Welcome back to Disturbed Reality. When it comes to cartel leaders, those who have followed this channel for long enough will be very familiar with certain names, such as Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, aka El Mencho, leader of CJNG, Miguel Trevino Morales, aka Z-40, the former leader of Los Zetas, and Joaquin Guzman, aka El Chapo, the former Sinaloa kingpin. Though, one name in which I have not mentioned much is Heriberto Lazcano Lazcano, aka Z-3, though he also went by the nicknames of El Lazca and El Verdugo, which simply translates to the executioner. Lazcano was a former Los Zetas leader. On Christmas Day of 1974, Heriberto Lazcano was born in Apan Hidalgo in Mexico. He came from humble beginnings and was raised in a poor family. Not too much is known about his youth, but it's said that he took an interest in combat early in his life, so much so that he would enlist in the Mexican army as an infantry soldier at just 17 years old. Heriberto's calm nature and ability to follow instructions impressed both his peers and his superiors. He was later enrolled into the Grupo Aeromóvil de Fuerza Especiales, an elite special forces team that were dedicated to combating socialist guerrilla movements and drug trafficking organizations in Latin America. His first military operation took place during the presidency of Ernesto Zedillo. He was sent along with other special forces soldiers to put down the armed insurgency in Chiapas. This took place in the mid-1990s, essentially, in short, on January the 1st, 1994, the Zapatista Army of National Liberation began their military insurrection in the southernmost province of Mexico, Chiapas, in the name of the rights of the oppressed indigenous peoples and democracy. This was the same date on which the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, took effect. The marginalized state boasted a wealth of natural resources, though the indigenous people of the land felt taken advantage of by the then Mexican government, as well as by the new North American Free Trade Agreement. This conflict was where Heriberto experienced guerrilla warfare firsthand, as well as military shock and awe tactics in which he and his Zeta crew would use years later. In the early 90s, little did his colleagues and superiors know that the skills he was learning would be used to shift the paradigm of the Mexican narco culture from small arms criminals to a paramilitary environment. After his service in the Chiapas conflict, he was then moved to northern Mexico as part of a security reinforcement program against drug trafficking organizations. While serving in the Mexican army, Lazcano reportedly received training from the Israeli Defense Forces and the United States Army. He acquired training in areas of counterinsurgency and counter-terrorism tactics, as well as sniper techniques, jungle, mountain, desert, naval, and urban warfare, and also learned how to use explosives, high-caliber rifles, and even grenade launchers. In short, he was a highly capable combatant with an understanding of various conflict types as well as different weaponry. By this point, he wasn't a low-level infantryman, but a highly skilled killer. By the mid to late 90s, Lazcano would become a police officer in Tamaulipas, but by the late 90s, he had started to work for the Gulf Cartel under the boss Osiel Cardenas. During this time, Cardenas had taken over the Gulf Cartel after the arrest of former leader Juan Garcia Abregu. Juan was arrested in 1996, and for several years, a power vacuum was left upon the top of the Gulf Cartel. Eventually, Osiel Cardenas would claim the status as the cartel leader after he ordered the assassination of his close friend, Sergio Gomez, aka El Checo, who at the time was a candidate to lead the Gulf Cartel. This earned Osiel Cardenas the nickname of Mata Amigos, in English, the Friend Killer. By July of 1999, after several years of uncertainty, Osiel Cardenas took position of leader of the organization. However, despite his leadership status, it's said that Osiel was a paranoid wreck. He feared that elements of the Golfos were out to get him, as well as rival cartels and law enforcement. This in turn marked the creation of Los Zetas, who at the time were essentially created to be the bodyguards of Osiel, but they would eventually become the cartel's official armed wing. Osiel reached out to Arturo Guzman de Sena, an army lieutenant who was reportedly asked by Cardenas to look for the best men possible to essentially operate as his personal bodyguards. Consequently, Arturo Guzman de Sena deserted from the armed forces and brought more than 30 army deserters with him to form part of Osiel's new criminal paramilitary wing. They were enticed with salaries much higher than those paid by the Mexican army. Among the original defectors were Jaime Gonzalez Duran, Jesus Enrique Rejon Eguela, and Heriberto Lazcano. Little did Osiel know that he had sown the seeds for in which would create the most brutal cartel ever seen in Mexico. It's said that Arturo Guzman de Sena was the original Zeta. His nickname was Z1, and his crew, on behalf of the Gulf Cartel, would execute dangerous missions with great efficiency due to their militaristic backgrounds. They quickly grew in stature within the Gulf Cartel and turned from mere bodyguards to the official armed wing of the Gulf Cartel. The alliance would be dubbed as La Compañía by the Mexican media, or in English, the Company. Interestingly, during the inception of the Zetas, while travelling through Reynosa in Tamaulipas on the 18th of February 1998, Lazcano was detained by Mexican authorities with 325 kilograms of marijuana in his vehicle, a Chevrolet Silverado. During that time, Lazcano was still officially working as a judicial police officer in Tamaulipas, but was also working for the drug lord Osiel Cardenas. The federal document does not explain why he was allowed to leave after the narcotics were confiscated, but soon after this incident, Lazcano left the military and his duty as a police officer to work full-time for the Gulf Cartel. On the 22nd of November 2002, the original Zeta, Arturo Guzman de Sena, was shot dead by soldiers inside a restaurant after being spotted by the Mexican military. After the death of Arturo, it's said that Heriberto was seen as the head honcho within the Zetas faction. It's said, in around 2004, he became the Zeta faction's official leader. It's worth noting, on the 14th of March 2003, Osiel Cardenas was captured by the Mexican military, leaving a degree of uncertainty surrounding the Gulf Cartel's leadership. During the early 2000s, Los Zetas were proving themselves to be an effective part of the Golfo's trafficking strategy. With the Zetas taking new territory, this made it easier for the Golfos to transport drugs, in particular cocaine, into the USA. Despite the arrest of Gulf Cartel leader Osiel Cardenas, it's said that the Golfo's operation ran smoothly for a while. Osiel was managing the Golfo and Zeta organizations from prison in Mexico, In fact, the Zetas, on behalf of the Golfos, managed to win the turf war of Nuevo Laredo in the state of Tamaulipas against the Sinaloa cartel. It's said that the numbers game and the militaristic nature of the Zetas would prove too much for the Sinaloa organization. However, in 2007, Osiel Cardenas was then extradited to the USA, severing his ties with the Golfos and Los Zetas. Once again, this would trigger a power vacuum at the top of the organization for several years. By the late 2000s, it was the Zetas who were bringing in the money. They were moving drug loads for the Gulf Cartel, as well as winning territory disputes against rival cartels. But the problem was, they were not seeing enough of the profit. After the extradition of Osiel, the Gulf Cartel higher-ups had candidates in mind to take control of the organization, much to the dismay of the Zeta faction. The story goes that the Zeta group wanted Heriberto Lazcano to lead the organization as a whole, but the Golfos wanted Antonio Cardenas, the brother of Osiel, to be leader. High-ranking Zeta members disapproved of Antonio being leader due to his gambling and substance abuse issues. They viewed him as a liability and somebody who was easy to compromise. Another issue which increased the tensions between Los Zetas and the Golfos was the Gulf Cartel's desire to call a truce with the Sinaloa cartel, who of course the Zetas were at war with in the mid-2000s in Tamaulipas. The final nail in the coffin for the relationship between the Golfos and Los Zetas was due to the killing of Zetas Lieutenant Sergio Peña Mendoza, aka El Concord III, due to a disagreement over the drug corridor of Reynosa. Samuel Flores Borrego, a lieutenant of the Gulf Cartel, organized the assassination. Los Zetas demanded that the Gulf Cartel hand over the killers, but they refused. Shortly after, the two cartels would engage in a bloody war that would cripple both organizations in the long run. Heriberto Lazcano led his men into battle against the Golfos, and due to their militaristic experience, they would deal severe blows to their rivals. However, at the same time, the Zetas were under ever-increasing pressures from law enforcement. As the war waged on, several high-ranking Zetas were captured or killed by the authorities. With more and more of the original Zetas being eliminated, this caused a power struggle within the organization. On one side, several Zetas viewed Heriberto Lazcano as the leader, though others, especially newer recruits without a military background, viewed Miguel Trevino Morales as leader. On the 7th of October 2012, the Mexican Navy located Heriberto in Progreso, Coahuila. Upon the Navy's arrival, Lazcano and one gunman, who were inside a white van, opened fire against the Marines, triggering a shootout that left Lazcano, his gunman, and one Marine dead. This gave the green light to Miguel Trevino Morales to be the sole leader of Los Zetas, which would eventually mark their downfall. What made the Zetas so successful was the militaristic background in which the original leaders came from. Miguel, however, was your standard trafficker and didn't have the know-how of Heriberto when it came to warfare. The Zetas would eventually fracture in 2015 after the arrest of Miguel and his brother Omar. The most notable organization to come out of the Zetas split is Cartel del Noreste. Incidentally, they are still led by the Trevino Morales family. The levels of violence that the Zetas used in their heyday was something that had never been seen in Mexico up until that point. They introduced the paramilitary aspects of cartel warfare, which of course is an all too familiar sight in 2022. The Zetas were also amongst the first to utilize violent propaganda material, such as leaving dismembered bodies in public view, accompanied by narco banners, as well as using the internet to distribute their execution videos in an attempt to shock and strike fear into their enemies' hearts. The shock and awe type tactics utilised came from the likes of Heriberto, who himself realised the impact of hyperviolence due to his own experiences in the military. It's said that one of Heriberto's personal favourite execution methods was to have captives being fed alive to his exotic animals, such as tigers and lions. Despite his death, the negative impact that he left on Mexico can still be seen to this day. Much of the violence came out of the conflict with the Gulf Cartel. In the early 2010s, both sides would release grisly executions almost on a weekly basis, seemingly trying to outdo one another. Which brings us to today's videos. They depict supposed Zeta members being brutally executed by Gulf Cartel hitmen. But nevertheless, what happens in the actual videos? The first video is a short one, at only 1.5 minutes long, and it's said to be rare. The video was first uploaded online in around 2012 or 2013, and as a result, the picture quality is very poor. As the video opens up, a man can be seen tied to a chair. The initial camera shot is over his shoulder, so you can see his body, arms and legs. He is surrounded by several sicarios, and it seems that the recording captures the final moments of his interrogation. The camera fixates on the victim's left hand. A knife-wielding sicario then takes the blade and removes his fingers one by one. A box is beneath the victim to catch the severed fingers and dripping blood. As his fingers are being severed, the noises he makes are hard to explain. He isn't screaming, but wailing, almost making a ghoulish, ghost-type sound. The sicario seems excitable as he is removing the fingers, talking in frantic patterns, possibly due to being high. After the fingers on the victim's left hand are removed, the cameraman changes position so that you can see the victim sitting in the chair, face on. He has a horrified expression on his face, as multiple men seem to shit-talk him. His right arm also seems to be covered in blood, possibly due to a stab wound which occurred off camera. The executioner then re-enters the shot, carrying the same knife. He places one hand on the victim's head to keep him still, and with the other, he takes the blade and places it on the captive's throat, and then begins to slice. This draws a violent reaction from the victim. He tries to turn away from the blade and slide out of the chair, to no avail. His facial expressions, as he has his throat hacked, are terrifying. Blood immediately pours down the victim's white shirt. The executioner seemed to hit an artery early during the beheading. The victim doesn't scream, but after a while, he starts making a raspy gurgling sound as he tries to cling on to life. The killer insults the victim as he is executing him, calling him puta madre as the life drains from his eyes. The killer struggles to complete the beheading, often cutting at different sides of the neck to complete the process. Towards the end of the video, he tries to twist the victim's head off, but this didn't work. Gunshots can be heard in the background at this point. In the last few seconds, the beheading is all but complete, with the head being held on by a mere strand of flesh. This is where the video ends. In regards to the second video, once again, it depicts Gulf Cartel hitmen murdering a supposed Zeta member. This is an interesting one, as some speculate that this was the first execution video released during the Golfo vs Zeta conflict. The execution method is also very unusual. It's a longer video, at nearly 6 minutes in length, though most of the duration is interrogation. The setting is a bleak dark room, and a man in only his underwear can be seen tied to a chair in the centre of the room. It's almost like a scene from a Hostel movie. His captors have written text on his body, branding him with several Zs, indicating that he was a Zeta. He confirms this during the interrogation. Written on his body is also the name Heriberto Lazcano, the then Zeta leader. The Golfos in the video can be heard exclaiming that "we are coming for you, El Lazca." At the end of the video, the execution is carried out. One of the Golfos stands behind the victim and places what appears to be a belt of some description around his neck. He then takes 2 rods and places them through the belt so that when he twists the rods, the belt will tighten. It's essentially a garrote. As he twists the rods, the belt constricts around the victim's throat. The killer is twisting so hard that the victim cannot scream or make any sounds at all. His eyes almost look like they are ready to pop out of his head. A jump cut then occurs, and the video then shows the victim, but off camera, he had been decapitated. The video ends with a threatening message to Heriberto Lazcano. Although this isn't the most graphic cartel video that I've ever seen, the visuals are extremely creepy and unnerving. It may even be possible that this is the only garrote execution caught on camera. Both videos are extremely gnarly, definitely not for the faint of heart. I was also going to discuss another video surrounding this conflict, however, the video can no longer be found online, so potentially, in the future, we may even do a Cartel Lost Media video, but we shall see. Anyway, that is the video. I hope you enjoyed it, if you can enjoy this sort of content. Once again guys, thank you for the support, it's much appreciated. Any video topics, please feel free to share them below in the comments, email me, follow me on Twitter and DM me. You are more than free to recommend video topics. I've also launched a Twitch channel. I usually stream once a week on Fridays after the videos go live. That is when I tend to stream, so check me out there. The link will be in the pinned comment. I am also thinking about doing traditional true crime content. Obviously, I will put my own spin on it, but let me know what you guys think of that idea. I think what I would do, if I do eventually do those sort of cases, I would introduce them as bonus videos. I think that is the best way to go about it. But again, any ideas, any suggestions, constructive criticism, let me know. But as always, stay safe, and I'll catch you on the next one.